A kind man paid for a struggling woman's meal, unaware she was a millionaire. Days later, love found them. The rain drummed softly against the windows of the small diner, casting a misty glow through the glass. Inside, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the comforting aroma of warm bread and sizzling bacon. Soft jazz played from the corner speaker, blending with the low murmur of quiet conversations from a handful of late-night customers. Jake sat alone at a corner booth, his grease-stained hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. His worn denim jacket hung over the back of the chair, damp from the rain. The ache in his shoulders lingered from a long shift at the garage, but it was the kind of exhaustion he was used to, familiar, even comforting. This diner was his sanctuary, the kind of place where no one asked questions and everyone minded their business. But tonight, something felt different. At the far end of the diner, Lila sat by the window, her arms folded tightly as she stared out into the rain. Her usual polished confidence was nowhere to be found. She wore a simple gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, far from the designer labels she was accustomed to. She had come here on impulse, desperate for a moment of quiet after a day filled with back-to-back meetings, relentless expectations, and the suffocating weight of the image she was forced to maintain. Tonight, she just wanted to be invisible. Her meal sat half-finished, just a bowl of tomato soup and a side of toast. Simple, humble. For the first time in years, she felt normal. But as she reached for her bag to pay, her stomach dropped. The wallet was gone. The waiter, a young man with an impatient frown, approached just as she was rifling through her coat pockets for the third time. "Everything all right, ma'am?" His voice was polite, but the edge of impatience was clear. Lila's face flushed. She felt the stares of the other customers pressing in on her, the discomfort prickling at her skin. I'm so sorry," she stammered, forcing a tight smile. "I must have forgotten my wallet. I can come back tomorrow and—" "Ma'am," the waiter interrupted, clearly unimpressed. "We have a policy. Payment is due before leaving. No exceptions." Lila swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. From his booth, Jake watched the scene unfold. At first, he thought it was just another awkward misunderstanding. But as the exchange continued, he noticed the tension in her face, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she searched her coat pocket. She wasn't trying to avoid paying. She was genuinely distressed. Without thinking, he stood. "Hey!" Jake's voice broke through the tension as he approached the counter. Lila's head snapped toward him, her face pale with embarrassment. Jake gave her a calm, reassuring nod before turning to the waiter. "I've got it," he said simply, pulling a few crumpled bills from his wallet. Lila's eyes widened. "No, please, I can't let you." Jake held up a hand, stopping her gently. "It's just a bowl of soup," he said softly. "Really? Everyone has bad days. No need to make a big deal out of it." The waiter, clearly relieved, took the cash and walked off without another word. Lila sat there stunned. No one had ever done something like that for her before, at least, not without expecting something in return. When she finally found her voice, it was softer. "You didn't have to do that. I could have figured it out." Jake shrugged, offering a small, easy smile. "I know, but sometimes it's nice to let someone else help. Trust me, I've been there." A beat of silence passed between them. Lila wanted to say more, to explain herself, but the vulnerability felt too raw. She wasn't ready to reveal who she was or the life she was running from tonight. Instead, she reached for a napkin and scribbled something down. "Thank you," she said quietly, sliding the folded napkin across the table before rising. Jake watched as she left, the bell above the door chiming softly behind her as the rain swallowed her figure into the night. He unfolded the napkin. "I owe you. Please let me make this right. Lila." Beneath it was a phone number. Jake stared at the note for a long moment, the edges of his lips curling into a soft, curious smile. He didn't know who she really was, and neither of them realized how that simple act of kindness was about to change their lives forever. The rain had finally cleared, leaving behind a crisp autumn breeze as Lila stepped back into the familiar diner. The cozy warmth welcomed her, the scent of coffee and fresh pastries mingling with the low hum of conversation. She clutched the napkin with Jake's number scribbled on it, folded neatly inside her coat pocket. Over the past few days, she had thought about their brief encounter more than she cared to admit. His kindness had lingered with her in a way she hadn't expected. Tonight, she wasn't here out of guilt. She was here to make things right. Jake was in his usual corner booth, a paperback novel open in front of him, though he wasn't reading. His mind kept drifting back to the mysterious woman from the other night. When the bell above the door chimed, he looked up, and his heart stuttered slightly. It was her. Lila approached cautiously, her hands tucked in the pockets of a beige coat, her face softer, less guarded than before. "Hi," she said with a nervous smile. "Do you mind if I join you?" Jake blinked, caught off guard, but nodded quickly. Sure. Yeah, of course." She slid into the seat across from him, resting a plain envelope on the table. "I wanted to come back and thank you properly," she began, her voice steady but gentle. "You didn't have to pay for my meal the other night, but you did, and I appreciate that more than you know." Jake gave a modest shrug. "It wasn't a big deal. You looked like you were having a tough night. I've been there." Lila pushed the envelope forward. "I owe you this. Please let me pay you back." Jake hesitated before taking it, glancing inside to find cash far more than the cost of a bowl of soup. He frowned, shaking his head. "This is too much." Lila smiled softly. "Consider it interest, or maybe just my way of saying thank you properly." For a moment, neither spoke. "So, do you come here often?" she asked, attempting to break the awkward silence. Jake chuckled. "Yeah, it's kind of my spot after work. Helps me unwind." "What do you do?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I'm a mechanic," he replied. "Mostly small repairs, oil changes, tire rotations, nothing fancy, but it pays the bills." She nodded. "Do you like it?" He shrugged, a distant look settling in his eyes. "I do. I mean, I didn't grow up with much, so working with my hands, it's honest, simple. But I guess I've always had this dream of owning my own garage someday. Something small, local, the kind of place where people trust you, you know?" There was a quiet sincerity in his voice that tugged at Lila's heart. He spoke not of ambition for wealth but for purpose, something she hadn't heard in a long time. "And you?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. Lila hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I'm working in business consulting," she said, keeping her voice light. "It's not as fulfilling as what you do, but it helps people in different ways, I suppose." Jake nodded thoughtfully, though a flicker of curiosity crossed his face. Their conversation flowed easier after that. They spoke about books, Jake revealing his love for classic literature, while Lila confessed she had barely had time to read in years. He shared stories from the garage, funny customer mishaps, and she laughed genuinely for the first time in a long while. Lila was captivated by his simplicity, how his dreams were so rooted in honesty. And Jake, he felt drawn to the quiet grace she exuded, the hint of vulnerability beneath her polished exterior. As the night stretched on, the diner grew quieter, the rain long gone, leaving behind a sky dotted with stars. For the first time in years, Lila didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. And Jake, for the first time in longer than he could remember, didn't feel alone. Lila carried the way she listened without judgment, as if truly seeing Jake for who he was. Days passed, and their meetings became more frequent. They'd meet at the diner after work, sharing coffee and stories, laughing over shared jokes. Jake found himself looking forward to those moments, while Lila felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. But as their bond deepened, so did Lila's growing guilt. She wasn't lying technically, but she wasn't being truthful either. One night, as they lingered over half-empty coffee mugs, Jake's words caught her off guard. "You know," he said thoughtfully, stirring his drink, "I've met a lot of people who seem to think money fixes everything, but it doesn't. I've seen too many guys with fancy suits who forget what it's like to actually work hard." Lila's stomach twisted. He didn't know, but his words still stung, not because he was wrong, but because she was part of that world, the one he clearly resented. Later that night, as she lay in her penthouse apartment, staring out at the city lights, Lila felt torn. Would he still look at her the same way if he knew the truth? Would he still see the woman in the diner or just the millionaire with the perfect life he assumed she had? She wasn't sure she wanted to find out, not yet. The diner was quieter than usual that evening, the rain tapping gently against the windows in a soothing rhythm. Jake sat at his usual booth, waiting for Lila. Their meetings had become the highlight of his week. Simple conversations over coffee and pie, moments that felt so genuine, so real. But tonight, she was late. He checked his phone again. No message, no missed calls. Just as he was about to give up and leave, he saw her outside the window. Lila was standing on the sidewalk, speaking softly to someone, a sharply dressed older man standing beside a sleek black town car. The car, it wasn't just a ride. It was the kind of luxury car you didn't see in this part of town often. Jake watched as the driver opened the door for her. Lila offered a polite nod, slipped inside, and the car pulled away, vanishing into the rain-slick streets. Something felt wrong. Jake tried to shake it off. Maybe she was just catching a ride home. Maybe she had a friend helping her out. But curiosity gnawed at him. Back at his apartment that night, he opened his laptop and hesitated. Don't be stupid. But the image of that town car haunted him. Finally, he typed her name into the search bar, Lila Sinclair. The results loaded almost instantly, and what he saw made his stomach twist. CEO of Sinclair Enterprises. Net worth, $350 million. Philanthropist. Business mogul. Article after article. Photos from galas and charity events. Interviews in Forbes and Business Insider. The woman he'd been meeting for coffee wasn't just in business consulting. She owned a global empire. The next day, Jake didn't return her calls. Or the next. Lila, confused and hurt, tried to give him space. She sensed something was wrong, but she had no idea he had discovered her truth. It wasn't until the fourth evening, back at the diner, that Jake finally showed up, this time unannounced. Lila had just finished dinner alone, her untouched coffee growing cold, when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, relief flooding her face, until she saw his expression. He looked different, cold, guarded. Jake, she breathed, standing. I've been trying to. He cut her off, his voice low but tight with emotion. So you're not struggling at all, are you? Lila blinked, her heart sinking. What? He dropped a folded magazine onto the table. It was open to a feature article with her face prominently displayed, the same face she had tried so hard to hide. Lila Sinclair, he said bitterly. The billionaire philanthropist. Jake, please, Lila whispered, reaching for his hand. Let me explain. He pulled back, his jaw clenched. Explain what? That you lied? That you pretended to be someone you're not? Was this all a game to you? Tears welled in her eyes. No, I never lied to you. You told me you were just working in business consulting, he interrupted, his voice rising. You let me sit there and tell you everything about my life, my struggles, while you have everything. You're a millionaire, Lila. Why hide it? Her voice cracked. Because I wanted you to see me, not my money. Every man I've ever met only cares about that, about my wealth, my name. I didn't want you to see that version of me. I wanted you to see who I really am. Jake shook his head, stepping back. So what? You thought I'd treat you differently? That I'd use you for money? Is that what you think of me? No, she cried, her voice desperate. I was scared you'd see me the way everyone else does. I've spent so long being defined by my last name. I just wanted something real for once. And what we had, it was real, wasn't it? Jake's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but the hurt was still too raw. I don't know anymore, he whispered. Silence hung thick between them, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down. Lila reached for him again, her voice trembling. Jake, please. I care about you. I didn't mean to hurt you. He stared at her for a long moment, his fists clenched at his sides. Maybe you didn't mean to, he said finally, his voice hoarse. But you did. And with that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Lila standing alone. The rain, once again falling softly outside, felt colder than ever. The days blurred into a quiet, aching void for both Jake and Lila. Jake hadn't returned to the diner since their confrontation. The place that once felt warm and comforting now seemed hollow, a reminder of a connection he wasn't sure had ever been real. He kept his head down at the garage, working long shifts, trying to drown out the thoughts gnawing at him. But no matter how much oil he wiped from his hands, no matter how many engines he fixed, she lingered in his mind. Her laugh, the softness in her eyes when she listened to his stories, the way she made him feel like he mattered. But she was a billionaire, and he was just a mechanic who barely scraped by. At night, he lay awake in his small, cramped apartment, the silence louder than ever. Maybe she was right. Maybe she didn't trust me because I'm not enough. He replayed their conversations in his mind, the raw vulnerability she had shown. Yet the pain of being deceived lingered. Was it a lie, or was she scared? Lila, meanwhile, sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, staring out at the glittering city below. The skyline she once admired now felt like a cage.